Hi, friends. It's Heidi M, and I'm virtually sitting here with filmmaker Hamoody Jaafar. Nice to meet you, Hamoody.
Very nice. Very nice to meet you, Heidi.
Very excited to speak with you today about a film that will be screening here at Hot Docs in Toronto, Canada. Hot Docs is the Canadian International Documentary Film Festival. But before we dive into this great project of yours, maybe just a bit of an intro in terms of your filmmaking experience and sort of I noticed that you've worked with sports in your previous work, and how did you get into that?
Yeah. So yeah. So Hamoody Jaafar, I'm a filmmaker from Southeast Michigan. Um, First generation American, child of immigrants. It's kind of like to give people a little bit of background about, my journey. Yeah, film. I mean, this is my debut feature film. So this is my first feature length
Mm.
picture. And I've been telling stories, short documentary, short film, narrative, branded commercials, probably for, gosh, 10, 15 years now. And yeah, most recently, like before this project, I had done a mini documentary on the NBA's Cleveland Cavaliers
Hmm.
and kind of told the story of how their franchise was born in the city of Cleveland. And um, that's kind of what segued me into the Rouge story. I was like looking for something locally, and so that's kind of how all that started.
Very cool. So, Rouge is the name of this first feature like documentary. Congratulations on that. It's actually, I know it's premiered locally, in
Yep.
Detroit. So
Yep.
I'm happy to hear that. So you mentioned that, this other short work on the Cavaliers segued you into, I guess, finding out more about Rouge,
Yeah.
River High School and that legacy of the basketball state championships that they've had. So, what was that like in terms of getting into that research side of things first, and
Yeah.
then thinking of a way that you want to develop the story into more of a feature documentary?
Yeah. Such a good question. So it's, and when you're in Southeast Michigan in the Detroit area, it's not like there are obviously filmmakers and there's an industry here that exists, but anything that you're trying to tell, like story wise, you're obviously doing it out of passion, out of just trying to put like a team together. And so I'll take you back to like the winter of 2019. I had just finished that documentary I was telling you about, the one that was on the Cavs, and I was looking for a story locally, and I was just trying to find a basketball story. And actually, what happened was I was invited to capture the opening night of high school basketball in Michigan. It was called the Ipsy Tip-Off Classic, was the name of it. And it was held at Eastern Michigan University. And it was actually centered around a basketball prospect named Emoni Bates.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in the NBA now. Ironically, he plays for the Cavs. I didn't make that connection until right now. But so I had gone out to film him, and I wanted to just kind of film like a proof of concept around him. I wasn't even sure what it would be. I thought maybe I could edit something really interesting together. Having access to the event, to the locker rooms, I would have, an intimate, approach to it all. So when that night came, that was the only locker room I wasn't allowed into. And then by default, landed in the River Rouge high school locker room because that was his opponent that night.
Okay, okay.
And so then they went out and won, and which I wasn't expecting. And there's another part to the story that's really serendipitous, I guess. Like I grew up in the mid to late 90s here in Southeast Michigan, and I grew up rooting for River Rouge High School because they were the best basketball team around.
Mm-hmm.
They were on local television. They had their own beat writer. They had a production team that followed them. And they were, so Brent Darby, who was their best player at the time, was
Mm-hmm.
somebody that I really looked up to. And he had passed away in 2011.
Yes.
And that night, taking you back now to the Emoni Bates night when I went into the locker room, that night I I realized he had a son that was there playing at River Rouge, his dad's alma mater, playing for his dad's coach. And, they went out and beat Hamoody Base. So from there, I was just completely consumed by what was like unfolding in the present.
Mm-hmm.
And I fell down like a rabbit hole of research after that.
Right.
And I wasn't even privy to the history that occurred prior to the 90s. Like I only knew about the 90s.
Right.
And so then when I realized there was this, integrated high school in the late 40s, that in the 1950s and 60s into the early 70s were in like 80 to 90% of the state championship games in the state of Michigan. I was just blown away. I couldn't believe that I didn't know about it. And so then I realized, wow, there's a really awesome opportunity here to tell a historical documentary, or at least use the history to kind of elevate the stakes of the present that I was very familiar with that was unfolding. So that's really how it was born.
Mm-hmm. That is so interesting because I also see that there's this strength in the documentary of linking past and present,
Yeah.
which I think works really nicely. I was speaking to a friend who loves basketball as well, and he was telling me that he used to, in the 90s as well, he would subscribe to one of the Detroit papers to read the stats from the high school teams too. So it's interesting to know that there are people here, even in Canada, that kind of were aware of the name River Rouge High School, but they don't really know sometimes the legacy that comes behind that.
Right.
In uncovering this rich history of Lofton Green and sort of his really, I guess, quote unquote, progressive way of thinking for the
Yeah.
team, how did learning about that sort of OG coach
Yeah.
you into
Yeah.
meeting all these really interesting players from that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so Coach Stone, who was the coach that I was familiar with from the 90s, that I realized was back at his alma mater coaching, he actually played his senior season
Mm-hmm.
for Lofton Green. So knowing that Lamonte kind of connected all the eras, it was kind of obvious that that was a really, really unique way to be able to kind of keep everything intertwined. And then, yeah, of course, Lofton Green is the winningest coach in the state of Michigan's history. He's a Hall of Famer. I couldn't believe that growing up in the 90s, being as big of a basketball fan as I was, because I was a big fan of the Bad Boys, the Pistons, and
Mm-hmm.
the Fab Five, University of Michigan in the mid 90s, and obviously River Rouge High School. I couldn't believe I didn't know about the Green years.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I discovered, and I'm a minority in basketball, you know, for me, like it helped me a lot as a young person. I mean, it really helped integrate me into my society, into my community. And it helped, me gain acceptance and friendships. And it taught me a lot of great core values that I still have to this day. And yeah, like knowing that what Lofton Green had done, he was very ahead of his time, I believe. I mean, obviously he's from Kentucky. So he had seen segregation probably on a much different level. And then when he came to the North, and was living in Michigan and coaching high school basketball, I assume he just had a different, I don't know. He was obviously for that era ahead of his time. And knowing that that transpired down the road from where I grew up, I was just really passionate about telling that story because they were the first in the state to have an all-black starting five that
Right.
won a state championship. Nobody knew that. Nobody had really known of that story. And the level of success that they obtained because they were doing the right things and they played the game the right way. And it was all about team. It wasn't about individuals. I had just never heard of a high school basketball team, because especially in from 61 to 72,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they won 8 state titles and they
Yeah.
were in, I think, 10 of those games. So yeah, that was literally, there's a line in the film that if you grew up as a basketball fan in the 60s, you knew of the Boston Celtics, you knew of
Mm-hmm.
the UCLA Bruins in college basketball, and then you knew of River Rouge High School. And so I don't know if there's a better line than that to sort of say this. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah, I
that,
think that was really encapsulating of that moment in time, right?
yeah,
I like how you mentioned that Lamonte sort of is a key figure across time because of his involvement as a student and coach, and now again as a coach. And, that leads me to thinking of that theme of mentoring relationships that we see quite strongly through the film.
yeah,
And, the film also focuses on three really great players, Legend and Brett Darby Jr., who you mentioned, Legend Greeter, and Amani Weston. So I want to know a little bit more about the film. Comes across as very comfortable in terms of your camera being there in a lot of different moments in terms of the coach interacting with the players, but also the players interacting with themselves and their families. Can you talk a little bit about building those relationships?
oh yeah. I mean, that's like those guys are family, you know? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, I mean, when the cameras weren't rolling, we'd be barbecuing, we would hang out, we'd go out to eat, but so the idea was like when I knew that Brent Darby Jr. was there, that story's obvious because his dad's name is literally on the floor. You know, it's on the hardwood. So like that father-son legacy story was very obvious to me, but I also wanted to lean in on a couple of different guys that I felt like had some really interesting stories and stakes, that were present day student athletes. And yeah, like Legend to me is number one, his name is Legend. Uh, but outside of that, like he is such a humble, selfless, and talented kid. And him and his family come, from some pretty dire depths of poverty. I mean, even just the River Rouge area in general, from a socioeconomic lens, from an environmental lens, is really oppressed and has a lot to overcome. So it's tough just being able to survive there.
Mm-hmm.
And Legend's a Rouge kid, and so his story was very obvious to me, and he was the highest rated basketball prospect. I mean, one of the highest in the state.
Right.
Um, and so it was just about really building that trust and coming from a genuine place. I mean, I grew up down the road, 3-4 miles away from the high school. So I think, when I sort of introduced myself and told them what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, everybody was very supportive, and I think they felt like I was coming from an authentic place, and
Mm-hmm.
I could relate. I could relate. I could relate to a lot of the struggles. My parents came here with nothing. I mean, my dad worked the night shift for 30 plus years just so we could have a roof over our head, and then in addition to like all that, of course, like just to mention Amani's story, like Amani Weston's story is so interesting because it is that the right word? Encapsulates so much of what's going on within that story, not only historically, but in the present, because people don't know, like River Rouge High School was supposed to be shut down. I mean,
Right.
a lot of neighboring community high schools were shut down in the early 2000s into the 2010s, and a lot of communities of color, and it has to do with a lot of socioeconomic issues that have hit those communities, and student enrollment had gone down in a lot of those school districts, and Inkster High School, which is where Amani's from, is one of them. And
Mm-hmm.
if River Rouge didn't reinvent themselves to be able to have open enrollment and bring kids in to not only increase their own student enrollment to survive, but also give young people a place to go to school,
Yeah.
um, we wouldn't even be here today, or we wouldn't have been able to tell the story. So I think Amani's story is so, so unique because you know, his story just, I think, summarizes it all in the present. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he uses River Rouge as a stepping stone in life. I mean, as a way to really survive. But what's so interesting about all of it is that the basketball legacy side of it is still like it was 1950.
Right. Yes. It's still
And
there.
that's, I think what makes it so unique. It's like it's so resilient. It's such a resilient place that nothing can really keep it down. You know, no matter what is thrown at it economically, environmentally, you know, that sort of championship, you know, roll your sleeves up, figure it out, grind it out
Mhm.
mentality is so present.
Right, and I think that sort of just tied up. That's also what we see a lot of in the film. That there's that mentoring that is sort of being passed down from
Yep.
generation to generation, and that's thanks to people like Lamonte, right? Because he kind of
Yeah.
gets having been there himself many years back. Um, let's talk a little bit about memory and sort of the way that the film is sort of crafted and edited together, in that we sort of weave in and out of time. We see footage that is archival footage, but we also see, like I mentioned, very intimate moments. What was that decision like in terms of, was that something you talked about with in the editing room, or you already had that concept?
No, that was that. I think we had so a little bit of both, of course, like finding the right doorway in the edit from a broader perspective. Like you
Hmm.
don't really know exactly how you're going to go in, but obviously you go in from a production lens with the intention of filming certain things that could be those doorways. And visually, like the place is so it has all these like nostalgic sort of textures and echoes, you know, just because like the Buck Weaver gym is very
Yes.
like just feel that just
Hmm.
being in there. So that was intentional, you know, like we knew a lot of those alumni. I mean, that gym had been shut down for 20 years. Nobody had stepped foot in it.
Yeah, you could tell.
So so knowing that, we knew that if we were going to invite alumni in to interview them, like we knew that them seeing it the way we had saw it for the first time would probably be even more emotional for them, of course, because they had such rich
Hmm.
nostalgic memories from their teen years and they hadn't seen it or really felt it since then.
Right.
So that was intentional to like have the alumni go in there for the first time and film that reaction. Um, and then also to your other question of like, how do you interweave the eras within the present day story? You know, like there's a part in the film where CJ, one of the team managers, he's listing and CJ is autistic, but
Hmm.
he's brilliant. Like he's so good with numbers.
Yes.
And you know, there's a scene in the film where he's listing off the state championship years of the past, and it
Hmm.
felt like such an appropriate way. It wasn't planned necessarily, but once we got into the edit, it felt like an appropriate way to go into the green years because, you know, he's listing off the years, and then we had that B-roll footage of like Coach Stone going in there with a couple of the community guys for the first time.
Right.
That in combination with the alumni walking in for the first ended up sort of shaping into the edit.
Hmm.
And it was very similar for the 90s guys. Like we didn't interview them right on the court. We
Right.
decided to interview them in the locker room
Right.
because they were the last team to play in that locker room. So
Hmm.
that and their names were still like on the locker. So like
Mm,
that felt appropriate from a production perspective to capture them. And then that ended up working out in the edit as well.
for sure.
Um, so those were kind of the avenues we took, and we knew that like the backbone of the story was going to be the present, and that we were going to have to find appropriate doorways to introduce the past without staying in there too long, because
Hmm.
obviously we want the audience to be able to stay on track. So that was our goal, was like, let's introduce it in the present. Let's go into the past and elevate the stakes of really what had happened here, had been
Hmm.
accomplished here, and let's come back into the present, introduce another era that was more recent to really make you understand some of the character stories and whatnot, and then back to the present, you know? So yeah, that was always, I think, the goal.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was thinking of the scenes where the alumni meet the young players that were you were filming in the present, and what that energy must have been like in real life for you to witness too, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
were there
that's
moments
always,
that stay with you? Sorry.
no, there's a line, because there's a line that Paul Green says. He was
Mm,
Coach Lofton Green's son, and he says like there's something about River Rouge where it doesn't matter if you graduated in 1950 or in the 80s or now, like everybody knows each other. And And it's true because like those faces become so familiar over the years. When you go to
Mm,
school there, you become an alumni. So you're
right.
back supporting the school and
Mm,
supporting the program, and you're in the stands now. And that's like, and not to give away anything with the ending, but like obviously one of the parts of the like epilogue of where we are now,
yeah.
you see Legend and Amani in the stands watching a game,
Mhm.
and so that's, I think, just very unique and special to the place, and it just speaks to, um, yeah, I mean, just like I really just believe it's one of the most unique and undiscovered communities and stories, like in North America, maybe even in the world. I don't know if that's too big to say, but it feels that way. I mean, it definitely
Mhm.
feels that way.
I think so, and I think kudos to your production team too in making us feel that way too, right? Because we become invested in the stories as well. Like, I mean, the historical context is really great, but it's
Yeah.
those moments when you put me on the court, or when you put me like next to these young guys who are like, we got to make this happen, where you feel that kind of energy.
Well, so the first week, I would say that wasn't as easy, just because we had these easy rigs and
Oh,
they're very visual. Like we
right,
knew we wanted it to feel super cinematic, so we wanted to use the proper gear for that because it felt like it was like a movie unfolding in front of our eyes. So we wanted the documentary to look and feel that way. So the first week was a little challenging with that, but as time progressed and the faces become more familiar and the energy is genuine and the connection is there, everybody that filmed is from not River Rouge, like I'm from the downriver area, so I was probably the closest to it. But the
mhm,
guys that were filming with me were from this like a few miles away. So it
right,
wasn't though, it was this foreign team from out of state, this foreign production team that was there trying to like take advantage of a story. It was like, hey, we're from here, we're storytellers, we believe in this.
mhm,
And that connection evolved. And then it became like the cameras weren't there,
right.
like as we spent time together off the court, that became even more familiar and comfortable. And I love that you're bringing that up because, I really believe those human moments are like that sort of verite style fly on the wall, um,
Mhm.
is very present. And we wanted that, we wanted that.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I mean, they're just really great young people to get to know,
Oh yeah.
each of the players themselves. I can sense there's something there. So, which is also again, kudos to your production team. I wanted to ask you if there were. I know that it's screened locally already, and I wanted to know what the reaction was from the people involved as
Mm.
subjects, and sort of that energy of screening locally and what that's like for you.
It's such a because we had hoped to get into Sundance and South by Southwest. Like I think those were always, I don't know what that is about being an independent filmmaker. It's just kind of like you feel like you got to get into those. And of course we were disappointed we didn't get in, but when we realized we were invited to be the opening night film of like the largest doc festival that we have in the state, that is by a very reputable publication, the Detroit Free Press, we were excited and we were honored. It's like it's an honor to be able to showcase something local that has this local history with and then it was obviously a local audience. I
Right.
don't know if you can describe that energy because
Mhm.
you can't really, there's nothing, no offense to like I hope that hot dogs is just special, of course.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a different kind of energy. It's a
It's
different.
different just because of you're getting such a similar vibe in one place
Mhm.
that everybody exudes that excitement and everybody exudes that pride. Yeah, it was just incredibly special. Like like there was there was alumni that said that was like the greatest night of my life, like that was, and I was like, man, you got married, you got a wedding, like you had kids born, like what about those
Right.
events? Like they're like, man, I'm telling you, like
It's
that was
up.
one of the coolest nights of my life because
Mhm.
it was like a red carpet, like we did it up, as we
Mhm.
should, because we were all so proud. So yeah,
Yeah, and I
special.
think no, and I totally get that because it's also, the community is reflected back on screen. And I think
Yeah,
that's what I mean by you can't not replicate that.
right.
It's the same
Yeah,
thing with like the young players seeing the alumni. It's like themselves seeing themselves, like in a
exactly.
different time. So I can totally understand that energy being different. What did the young men that played the players? What did they think of the film?
Oh, I mean, I think one of them said to me, "Is like, man, I didn't know you were like that as a director." So, and they were like, we knew, like, we had seen clips and pictures, and they're like, but man, that's like a real movie. Like we were like, and I was like, yeah, well, that was the intent, and it was just very positive. It was
Mm-hmm.
very, very excited and positive, and I think just surprised, even, maybe, like, that's probably a good word, in a good way. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like we blew them away, and I think that's as flattering as a compliment as you can get when you're telling a story of a community, and you just want to make sure you're doing the right, doing a good enough job to, like, make sure it feels genuine and authentic, and so yeah, it was very positive.
Yeah, I know. I'm glad to hear that because I think part of the reason why some of us are gravitating to the film too is that regardless of what the socioeconomic status may be for that community, you already talked about the resilience of the community, but also just people are people and these are the stories and there's so much richness in their stories. And I think
Yeah,
that's what really resonates with audiences. And I do think that Hot Docs audiences will appreciate that.
I hope so. I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. I'm curious to see what's next for the film. Anything you can share in terms of, is it going to continue its festival run? I would love to see it released somewhere, but that's just my own personal thing.
I mean, look, if you know anybody at HBO or Showtime, or, like, hook it up. But I
Right.
think, like, we're all independent, so we're we're hoping that we can get it out to wherever. I think we had our world premiere at the Cleveland International Film Festival. We did the Michigan one here at the Freep Film Festival, and then, of course, like, our international one at Hot Docs is, like, extremely flattering and exciting and validating. And we have about 10, maybe 20 others that we haven't heard from yet, that we're still, like, sort of, checking our inbox, kind of thing.
Yes.
That we've submitted to. So there's a string of other festivals that we're hoping to get into. And yeah, I mean, the plan is to, obviously, just like anybody, I think, like, the plan is to try to get distribution, and,
Mhm.
see if we can get on some kind of an award cycle or circuit. Everybody that, like, our cinematographers, obviously our producer Razi, and
Mhm.
our editors Chent and Ben, like, we're all Midwest guys. We all believe that our talent is up there with anyone from any market in the world from a filmmaking perspective. So we're hoping that, of course, with the story and our subjects and our team, that we can get to that next level of all of our lives and careers. So
Mhm.
that's the goal, and that's the hope. But I don't have a definitive answer for you, Adam. It's a little
That's,
undetermined, I'd say.
that's okay. We'll follow your journey. So to follow the journey for the film, I think there's a website and there's social media as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could follow us on Instagram. It's Rouge, ROUGE _documentary.
Mhm.
Um, Facebook.com, it's Rouge Documentary as well. And we have our own social media handles, of course. We post about it all the time. But that's pretty much what we have. I mean, we ask people to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We put all our updates on there. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, I think that's plenty. I know people, that's one way to reach a lot of people in community and outside of that, I think. So we'll be sure to tag that so that people know where to go.
Yep.
Hamoody, thank you so much for your time,
Oh, my
your
honor.
answers.
Thank you.
So interesting. And all the best in your upcoming premiere.
Thank you, Heidi. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.